Hi there, welcome to this vodcast on the collapse of détente, looking at the case study, the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union. Here we've got a lovely little cartoon, the Muslim rebels fighting off Brezhnev, and if you notice, you just see it there, the scimitar and the hammer, really kind of symbolising the communist symbol there. This and other videos and other resources that I've made, and other people have made as well, can be found at twitter.com/Britain History. So let's get started. So, key thing. First off, you have to understand, although the Americans and the Soviet Union were in a situation of détente, both wanted to extend their influence, and where they could see those things, opportunities occurring, they would seize them. So, an opportunity for the Soviet Union came in 1978. In 1978, the government of Afghanistan was overthrown and was replaced by a communist one led by Mohammad Tariqi. Now, this offered the Soviet Union a unique opportunity. It could extend its influence into a new area, pushing towards the Middle East. It could extend its control into a new kind of area, and also if it could push its influence further into the Middle East and also strategic bases in places like Afghanistan, then it would be able to put the squeeze on the Americans in terms of the Middle East and its oil-rich oil fields, and the places like the Straits of Hormuz, which is where all the oil tankers get their oil from Saudi Arabia and sail around the world to. So, the revolution brought instability to Afghanistan. Like most situations, when you have a violent overthrow of the government that replaces it typically then has to fend off against others. And in particular, Tariqi wasn't going to last that long. Many Muslim leaders didn't agree with his ideas of social reform, of socialist reforms that he wants to bring in, because the kind of thing with the hardline Muslim traditions within Afghanistan were kind of incompatible with some of the kind of communist principles, especially things like the limitations of religion. So by April 1979, the nation was in a state of civil war, and Tariqi was forced to accept the head of his army, a guy called Amin, as his prime minister. And as you can see there, if you're surrounded by guns, as Tariqi was, it's not long before you're going to get killed off. And Amin's allies had Tariqi killed quite quickly after that. So, Brezhnev orders an invasion of Afghanistan. Well, why? As you can see here, we've got the Soviets didn't trust Amin. He said he was a communist, but many Soviets within the KGB saw him as an ally of the US. I think he was a US educator. He was unpopular with many Muslims, same as Tariqi, for the same issues. He wanted to reform Afghanistan, and the things he was talking about that weren't probably agreeable to. And the Soviets were worried that if Afghanistan became an Islamic state, it would prompt some of their own republics to do the same. Places like we hear now, like Chechnya, which have issues of terrorism and instability within them. Linked to that is that obviously if Afghanistan turned into an Islamic state, it would have no reason to ally itself to the Soviet Union. So whilst the move was unpopular, the Soviets found an alternative, a guy called Kemal. Now, he was a communist, he favoured the Soviet Union, and he said he had popular support, but he would need the Soviets to intervene and help him. And you've got to question, how popular are you if you require attack helicopters, tanks, armoured personnel carriers, and the Russian army? And I suppose the final reason that Brezhnev orders the Soviet army to invade Afghanistan in support of Kemal is that he thought the United States wouldn't intervene. And the reason for that stems from two things. One, American foreign policy. The Americans hadn't been particularly strong on foreign policy really since the late 1960s. They'd been fighting the war in Vietnam. They got out of it in 75. Combat operations finished 72, 73. They finally got out in 75. They hadn't done a great deal when Brezhnev ordered the tanks into Czechoslovakia in 1960, in the crisis between 68 and 69. So he was kind of there thinking, well, they're not going to do a great deal here. And really, that diagram there gives you that rundown as to why he intervened. But the key thing here is he misunderstood the situation. The Soviets invaded Afghanistan on Christmas Day 1979, so while many people were thinking about Santa dropping down through the chimney in Afghanistan, it was going to rain bombs and paratroopers. The Soviets had him being killed, they put Kemal in charge, but it led to bitter resistance, and it also ended détente. The Soviets misunderstood the American thinking behind this. They were angered by this invasion and by the Soviet aggression. The Americans weren't going to intervene in areas under Soviet control, but Afghanistan was somewhere new, and they felt they needed to push more against what they thought was an expansionist Soviet policy. So Carter, who was coming towards the end of his presidency, a guy called Jimmy Carter here, he developed the Carter Doctrine. He was angered by what happened. As you can see here, there's the Soviet Union just here. You've got Afghanistan, you've got Iran, which had recently kicked out any kind of American influence in there. And here you've got the Straits of Hormuz and Saudi Arabia. And he said US policy was to ensure the Soviet Union would not take control of the oil-rich Middle East, which was vital to the US economy. You know, the US needed oil. It was its life source for its economy. So they really had to do something about this. And he developed this Carter Doctrine. And here we've got what it is. We'll start over here first. The Alliance to Support the Rebels. There were Muslim rebels called the Mujahideen, and the CIA backed the rebels. And it also developed a really almost bizarre alliance with communist China and Israel. You get China, communist, and the Jewish state of Israel backing, with America, Muslim resistance fighters against the Russians in Afghanistan. It seems bizarre. There's a really good film, Charlie Wilson's War, that goes through the CIA involvement in this, and it is just unbelievable what was going on then. Moving on, the economic sanctions. Carter instantly severed any diplomatic and economic ties with the Soviet Union, and economic sanctions would hit the Russians or the Soviet Union really, really harshly. Under détente, with the Helsinki agreements, the idea of trade and cooperation was kind of seen as one of the big issues of détente. That ends, and the Russians really need that level of technology and support from the Americans, so this is going to hurt them. He also ends diplomatic relations, and in particular SALT II. Carter had signed the SALT II treaty, which was going to be the more permanent treaty from SALT I, which was temporary. But even though he signed it, the US Senate, because of Afghanistan, never ratified it. It never gets passed by the US government. He then increases defence spending by 5%, and he orders the US military to start planning for winning a nuclear war. Now, whether that's just a bit of spin, that last point, or whether it's just some rhetoric, it doesn't matter. As far as Moscow is concerned, he's basically saying, look, you've done something wrong here, you need to back down. And finally, as a propaganda exercise, he boycotts the 1980 Olympics. He develops his own one, gets the Americans and some other nations to take part in alternative Olympic Games in Philadelphia, because the Olympic Games in 1980 were going to be held in Moscow. So this Carter Doctrine is a result. All these aren't examples of Carter Doctrine. It's basically the first 4, but it's all about ensuring that détente is gone, it's dead, it's finito, and instead it is about ensuring America's kind of presence in foreign policy is kind of front and centre. And as we're going to see with Reagan, that only ever increases even further. Okay, well, I hope that's helped. Obviously, we've gone through 2 elements here, the invasion of Afghanistan and the American response. If you have any questions, you can post it onto the YouTube video, and that will come straight through to me, or you can go via the Twitter site at twitter.com/BroHistory. All I can say is, hope you find it useful, good luck with your exams, and all the best. Thank you for listening.